Photographers' rights and copyrights dealing with photography. Have you ever seen this sign? You may have in some locations. Basically, it's the no photography sign, commonly placed in properties where the owner objects to or it's illegal to take photographs. In some jurisdictions, however, this is actually not a legal requirement. Photographers are facing more and more questions and charges for breaking laws, and it's extremely important to understand your rights and your responsibilities as a photographer. Now, know that your rights and the laws that are surrounding photography vary from state to state, country to country. So it depends on your location. You want to always make sure that you know what laws are enforced in the area that you are taking photographs. Here's an example for you. So, California state parks, you would think that there wouldn't be any laws prohibiting photography, but commercial photography requires a permit and sometimes proof of insurance. If you're traveling to Sudan, basically travelers who wish to take any photographs must obtain a photography permit from the government of Sudan. In Iceland, if you want to call yourself a photographer or work as a photographer, it requires a master's degree in photography from a specific technical college or a similar degree from another industry-based school in Iceland. This is an example of an U.S. Air Force installation site, and you can see here it says photography of this area is prohibited. So there are locations out there that you absolutely cannot take photography. There are areas that you need to have special permits in order to take photography. So always be aware of what your surroundings are and what the rules and laws are in that location. What if you think you're in a perfect place to take a photo and a security guard comes up and says, "You can't take that photo. You can't take photos here." What do? So what can I photograph and where can I photograph? Here's the general rule. If you can see it, you can photograph it. Public spaces are fair game for photography. So, again, the general rule is that you can photograph mostly anything as long as it's in a public place. So you do not need permission to photograph in public. And this does include photographing buildings and parks, as well as people that are in public areas. An example being we can take a photo if we're on public property. We can photograph private property. So the example is standing on the street, which is public property, and taking a photo of someone's garden, which is private property. That is okay to do. The key here is that you have to make sure you're not invading someone's right to privacy. So that means no telephoto lenses through windows into people's showers, into people's houses, bottom line. You cannot take that photo. But as long as you're not invading someone's right to privacy, you can take the photographs. The private property used as a public space, if someone's in a public place, you can photograph them. So it includes private property used as public space. Churches, malls, office lobbies, any other privately owned venues are still public spaces. Okay, so in the case of privately owned public spaces, say like a shopping mall, they can tell you to stop taking images, stop taking photos, but remember they cannot take your images, nor can they take the camera or detain you. We'll talk more about that in a moment. So here's the question. What do you do when people question you? there is a good chance that someone's going to come up and they're going to confront you and they're going to question you. It could be anyone from regular citizens to security personnel, law enforcement officers. They might question you and they might ask you to stop taking pictures, stop taking photos. They probably will refer to some sort of terrorism and say it's for security reasons. So what do you do? What to do when people question you? It's not a valid reason for them to ask you to stop. As long as you're in a public space, you have the right to photograph. However, use your best judgment. Of course, if you're being confronted, it might be easiest just to put the camera away. What should your reaction be? Now, you should act politely and stay as calm as possible. You do not need to give them your camera. You do not need to hand over a memory card, nor do you need to delete the images. Okay, so you don't even need to explain why you are there or what you are photographing. In most cases, you don't even need to disclose your own identity, but that is very dependent on the local or country laws in place. Unless they have a court order, do not give them your camera or the photos or a memory card. It's okay to ask them, what legal reason do you have for doing this? Can they cite a legal reason for doing this? Many people are confused on the photography laws and rights of a photographer, so it's a good idea to make sure you understand. So can you photograph anything you want? We just said if you're in a public place on a public land, can you photograph whatever you want? The question commonly comes up, what can I photograph? Can I photograph in court? Or can I photograph medical facilities, an accident, children at the park, a bridge, criminal activities, inside my neighbor's house, your neighbor's garden, nuclear facilities, a Frank Lloyd Wright building, Frank Lloyd Wright, very, very famous architect, or the Rubik's Cube? So think about those for a moment. Do you think you can photograph each one of those items? Well, here's a generalized yes and no. So, of course, lots of variables that come into play here. The first one, medical facilities, that's a no. And the reason is because there should be a reasonable expectation of privacy. You should not photograph at medical facilities, medical centers, hospitals, those types of things. Accidents, children at the park, bridges, criminal activities, and your neighbor's garden are all fair game, interestingly enough. Can you photo in a court? No. It's a criminal offense or contempt to take a photo in any court of any person, being a judge of the court, a juror, a witness, or a party to which any proceedings before the court. So it's whether it's criminal or civil, you cannot publish a photo from court. Also inside your neighbor's house. This is again that expectation of privacy. Nuclear facilities. This is an interesting one. The U.S. Department of Energy can prohibit photography of designated nuclear facilities, although the publicly visible areas of nuclear facilities are usually not designated as such. So here's a few more. Can you photograph trademarked images? Frank Lloyd Wright buildings, Rubik's Cube, military installations, restrooms, or ATM machines. Trademark images. Trademarks are the key to protecting a business's goodwill and to prevent unfair competition. Frank Lloyd Wright buildings. Say, for instance, you go visit Falling Water one of his most famous pieces of architecture, which is located in Mill Run, Pennsylvania. Photography here is only allowed for personal use. It is absolutely unacceptable for commercial use because now we get into some copyright laws. The Rubik's Cube. This is very interesting because it is protected by intellectual property laws throughout the world. So the protection includes any configuration, color, or shape, even without a logo. So images, including derivative works, are unacceptable for commercial use. Military installations, or other subjects that can be classed as national security. So these are the exception to the rule of public spaces. You cannot photograph those. Dressing rooms, restrooms, locker rooms, again, the exception to the rule of public spaces because it falls under that invasion of a person's privacy. So you're invading personal privacy. So you cannot take a photo in a dressing room, restroom, or locker room. And actually, in some jurisdictions, they have completely banned the use of a camera phone within a restroom or locker room in order to prevent this. How about at the ATM machine? If people were entering their code at the ATM machine, again, it's an invasion of personal privacy. You are invading that person's privacy. And so again, another exception to the rule of public spaces. You cannot photograph those. So if we go back over the list, things that we can and things that we can't photograph. Here are generalized things that we can. We can photo people, adults and children in public places. We can take a photo of law enforcement officers. We can take a photo of accidents and criminal activities as long as we don't get in the way of local law enforcement. We can take photos of celebrities. We can take photos of politicians, all of those public figures. We can take photos of public infrastructure, things like bridges. We can take photos of transportation related items like airports and train stations. We can take photos or videotape a tourist attraction, whether it's public or privately owned. It is generally considered legal unless explicitly prohibited by posted signs. So the next question that frequently comes up is, why can't I publish my photo? As photographers, we can take images of almost anything from almost anywhere, but that doesn't mean that we can publish those images. So taking a photo and publishing a photo are completely different issues. And this is where copyright, privacy, commercial use, fair use all come into play. There are laws surrounding how you can publish and distribute your photos. One thing to remember is these laws are not the same around the world. The main difference in your rights really depends on the photograph, if it's used commercially or not. So your photograph might be considered art. And if you call it art, then you have more rights to publish and use your photograph. Between art and commercial use, now in most countries you're allowed to publish and sell photographs that are considered art without a legal release from the person or the model in the photo. If you intend to use the photo in any commercial situation, you need a model release. If you sell the photo to a commercial agency, they are responsible for getting the model release from both the model and you as the photographer. Now, if this company goes ahead and publishes your photo without the model release, it doesn't come back to you. They are to blame. You are not to blame. You might not need a model release to take an image of the kids playing at the park, public place. You can take a picture of it. But you do need a model release to commercially publish that image. A difficult area here are the portfolios that you guys all will build. In a portfolio, it showcases your work. You will probably want to showcase some of your photography because it's a really good asset and skill set to demonstrate and show. So if you put photos in your portfolio, do you need a model release for anybody that happens to be in those photos? Well, they are used to display work. That's what a portfolio does. But is that commercial. In most countries, they are considered art. A portfolio is considered art. And so in most countries, you would be okay not having a model release. However, some people say the portfolio is used to gain employment, which is gain monetary value from that employment. So you're gaining something from the use of that photo. My thoughts on this, always get a model release. Just play it safe. There's no reason why not to get that release, and then you're safe. Now, news photography, even though they're used to sell a newspaper, typically they don't require a model release to be published and sold. Newspapers fall into that fair use in a lot of different areas. Traditionally, so newspapers have not needed a release for news article photos, but because of the increasing frequency of lawsuits, some news organizations are beginning to get model releases as a matter of extra protection.